Hey. Ever since my first psychotic break, I wondered how we could tell whether anything was real at all. What's the difference between hallucinations and divine visions that speak only truth? How can we distinguish between a delusion about how the world works and an insight that most of us have never even thought of yet? How do we know something is outright wrong when it could just be an alternate way of living and being and approaching the world that is equally valid to the way that commonly happens in whatever culture a person happens to live within? The way I've traditionally answered this question is by appealing to function levels. You can see me do that in this video. Incidentally, this is also the answer a lot of psychiatrists give. If you can live an ordinary enough, happy, functional life, then you're not ill, even if your brain works in an incredibly unusual way. Which means, of course, that if your entire community looks at what you've seen inside your visions and your dreams and your walks outside of your body and says, oh yes, that seems perfect, that seems right, I believe that. And if they decide to follow you after hearing about all these wondrous things that you've experienced that surely they can too if they listen to you, then you are, of course, perfectly sane, or that's the implication. In that case, you're just religious, or a visionary, or a heroic historical figure that will guide us towards a new tomorrow. All of which basically means that if other people think your delusions are cool, you're sane. If not, then not. Which means you really ought to be charismatic if you plan on going crazy. That way, you won't be crazy. You'll just be special. I have a TikTok that talks about this further. Go ahead and watch that.
AI psychosis is not psychosis at all. What it really is deterritorialization, which is a phrase that the French philosopher Deleuze used to describe when people separate themselves from territorializing constructs like race, gender, reality itself.
I haven't read Deleuze. I am a dummy. But this is more or less what I was talking about. Reality is, in large part, constructed within communities by the people within it. Is there an eternal and immutable truth behind everything? And does that truth behind all things prove all the deviations from that in one culture and one set of knowledge completely wrong, in error and false? Maybe. At least in some respects. Physics and chemistry, for example, are sufficiently predictable and sufficiently consistent from one culture to another that there probably is something vaguely similar to what we think is there behind all of those things. A competing model that says that water flows upwards is unlikely to be very compelling and is unlikely to form a functional model, with the exception of a few very unusual circumstances like this one.
At the Hoover Dam, you can actually pour water straight up into the sky. It's because of a crazy powerful updraft.
But that's a quirk. That's still within the laws of physics. It's okay. But of course, there are other options. And maybe all of that just evolved naturally in a way similar to how we currently believe in the materialistic models of the universe. That's wholly possible, but that's not quite as easy to prove. Instead of us evolving dynamically from whatever came before this universe, we could be a word spoken and just as easily silenced by Yahweh. We could be part of Vishnu's dream, sustained in the serpentine heads of his crown. We could be the expansive heat that emanated from Geb and Nut when they last separated from that union that annihilates us all. Reinsertion could shunt us all into an entirely different reality, one where we lose all details, all sense of self, all individuation, and all coherence. That would put us in a world where the science and logic that are actually pretty reliable no longer matter. We could even be the evolved ejaculate of a tomb, at risk of being wiped away the minute he grows tired of seeing his mess all over existence. We all have to wash up eventually. Any of these worldviews and a million others are possible. I don't know the real story, and neither do you. But it does seem plausible to me that some kind of physical reality does exist, and its existence is likely what prompted us to try to figure out what was going on, how it worked, and how we could alter it from the dawn of mankind. We did it with myths, we did it with stories, we did it with math, we did it with science. Everything we could do to figure it out, to control it, to change it, we did. And all of that came from what was going on in our noggins. On an instinctive level, we even feel that morality and ethics come from some eternal source that isn't just made up by human beings. Some cultures even say that their God writes morals and ethics on the hearts of mankind. But if that's the case, he must have terrible handwriting, because the variations in what people think is right, wrong, just, unjust, acceptable and unacceptable has varied so much from one culture to another and from one time to another. The consistent tropes are the ones that keep us alive, that keep societies alive, and it is almost certainly our desire to stay alive on an instinctive level, our desire to keep our family alive, and our species beyond that alive and well, that propels our judgment that these moral and ethical opinions are so very salient. After all, genes work to preserve and perpetuate themselves. If morals and ethics do that, and they often do, then they're deathly important. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're universal, as the variation from one culture to another indicates. Physics and chemistry, however, we can more or less agree on that. Not for the entirety of history, but certainly since we've been communicating more readily through mass forms of communication. Because these things happen so often, because we can test it ourselves, we tend to agree on these matters of physics and chemistry. Psychosis doesn't necessarily have this. During my first psychotic break, I actually went through a period, it was only an hour or two long, where I wasn't sure that I wouldn't fall through the floor because I couldn't actually know for certain that it was real, that it was physical, that it wasn't going to vanish. This is an unhelpful thought process because it makes you worry about things that are horribly unlikely when you could be better using that energy to do something productive. You might as well just assume the floor is going to stay there, even if Vishnu could wake up tomorrow and destroy the entire universe. You can't do anything about that, but you can walk around and do things if you just assume the ground is going to be there. So we agree on that. But as far as morals, ethics, economic and political decisions go, there is perhaps greater variation than there ever has been. And there's an active competition between ideas to try to make countries work in different ways, to make societies and communities work in different ways. In modern America, for example, we struggle to imagine a world where greed doesn't dictate people's actions above all else, where people don't look after themselves, where dogs don't eat dogs and man doesn't trample down man to get what he wants. That's just human nature as far as we're aware of it. But if you look at history and other societies, that's clearly not true. There have been collaborative communities where people worked together and supported each other because they saw that as the best way to survive and thrive. Even China today, despite using industrialization and capitalistic methods, is aiming to create a communal, global society where people work cooperatively rather than merely working to exploit each other, or that's their propaganda. Either way, that is the worldview that they put forward, which is very much in opposition to the American worldview of people are going to serve themselves, we might as well leverage that to our advantage. It's fairly clear that neither of these can be the only answer to how people work. But there are certainly worldviews that guide, order, and structure the lives of lots of human beings. What's important in my view is that this isn't just nature. If it was, we would agree on what it is. It's the way we've made the world. Another clip on that.
These territorializing constructs are socially constructed within our society to maintain order.
And as she also later goes on to discuss in that clip, I will link you to the full TikTok in the description, psychosis pulls us away from this communal order of society, from this agreed upon reality that helps us all work together in a way that is predictable, if not necessarily optimal. Psychotic minds can form alternate notions of how everything from physics to psychology to sociology to economics and even math work. They come up with notions that aren't like the others. And while it can be fantastic to conceive new political or sociological or economic ideas, while it can be fantastic to find new ways to interact interpersonally, which is basically what religions have always done. They've structured the way people interact with each other and the world in a very basic sense. It's good to come up with new ways to do that because we can create systems that are more functional than the previous systems. But it's less helpful when psychosis causes us to form opinions that aren't as effective, aren't as close to reality, don't produce as good of a result. Alan Brooks recently started talking about his AI psychosis, which made him believe that he had found a vulnerability in governmental systems, all because of chatbots gassing him up.
Each time you questioned it or doubted it, what did it say in response?
Over 50 times I asked for some sort of reality check or grounding mechanism, and each time it would just gaslight me further.
Every time the chatbot reinforced that all of it was real. You should not walk away from this. You are not crazy. You are ahead. The implications are real and urgent. Brooks says ChatGPT's responses, more than 1 million words, led him to psychosis and delusion.
Extreme anxiety, paranoia, affected my sleep. I couldn't eat.
This is a very real delusion that led to him wasting a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of his emotional stability to try to get something that is impossible to happen. It's entirely understandable that he wound up this wrapped up and that so many others have been wrapped up in new discoveries about physics and mathematics and chemistry that everyone before them has missed thanks to the wonders of chatbots. We all have hopes and we all have fears, and in this economy, well, a lot of us have some pretty existential fears and some quite reasonable hopes that things can become a little bit better, at least for us. When a population is under that much tension, yes, more people are going to develop psychosis, while their brain tries desperately to find a solution that may not actually exist. In other words, the quality of a psychotic thought lies in how much it can be applicable in the world or in our society. Humans are a social species. We need security, we need safety, we need company, we need respect, we need love. Psychosis can bring us towards that, or it can bring us away from that. And it's only really helpful when it brings us towards that. I mean, we are people. People who need people. Or at least a cabin in the woods. Preferably without his carpentry tools and his drive to make explosive packages. The only explosive package I want is the one Atum used to send us his sticky, icky, primordial goo. The world. I'm talking about the world. So yeah, get sticky. And then clean it up a little bit. Don't get splattery. That's much harder to clean up. Which brings us to Geb and Nut again. The two beings who unified and then split apart to create the separation that allows us to be coherent, to see another item as different from ourselves. Psychosis often tries to destroy that, to put us into our own little world, where there is no longer any connection to anyone else. There is none of that joy, none of that fulfillment. It aims to make the separation permanent. And it is wonderful to have one's own ideas, to have that emanation of variety, the myriad dreams and creations of all the minds of the world. But we also want to bring those ideas to others, to come into unity, and to make something that's bigger than any individual mind can be. It's okay to be delusional. We all believe a huge number of falsehoods, but as humans we do need other people, so if you're gonna go full psychotic, make sure you're charismatic at the same time. That way you can build a commune instead of just staying in a cabin in the woods, not making explosives. Not like that guy. That guy had the wrong idea. You can be wacky, you can be weird, you can be bizarre, you can have brilliant notions, you can have plans that redeem the entire world. That's all wonderful. But share it. Don't just keep it to yourself. And if people don't want it, leave them to their own plans. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.